Hey everyone, we're back with the next section. So we're just going to install Enterprise Portal. So let's go into our server. So what we're going to do is we're just going to open the Dynamics installation media. So under software, X2012, and we're just going to go setup. And we're going to install Microsoft Dynamics AX components. We're going to accept the license terms. I'm going to wait for it just to search for some updates. Okay, add or modify components, and we're gonna choose Enterprise Portal. Gonna go okay. We're gonna go next. Okay, so we just need ADO-MD.NET, so let's configure that. That's all good. Okay, these we don't need to stress too much about. We can go next. Okay, .NET Business Connector. So we set that up in one of the previous videos, and we're just going to use our administrative password. And we're just going to accept the defaults over here. So it's just going to look through. That's going to be our URL. And we're going to go next. Just going to wait for this to come through. Just checking the final prereqs, which hopefully it'll all pass, but you never can tell. Okay, so that's all good. So we can carry on to the next. And it's going to install just a binary update from CU12. So we're going to install that. And hopefully this all installs correctly. Often you'll have a few issues with Enterprise Portal. It's just because it's got so many different components. Customization of Enterprise Portal can be quite tricky, and the deployment as such. But if you followed all the steps up with me up to this point, it should be a fairly straightforward process. The problem really comes from when you're not following a consistent process, and you're not installing things in order, or there's too many often what happens with SharePoint, it becomes very difficult to install in production environments or big corporate environments because they lock down security a lot, user profiles, what you can do on the servers. So often what you'll do is you'll struggle when you go into corporations because they're not willing to give you elevated privileges, and they'll give you a kind of a simplified or restricted amount of elevated privileges, and then what happens is SharePoint becomes this absolute nightmare to install. So my advice is get absolute the most admin credentials you can get out of that organization, install it, and then they can always revoke access to you at a later point. I've seen some corporations that I've worked for. They spent 2 months and they couldn't get a SharePoint installed, and by extension Enterprise Portal. They just kept going down the same rabbit hole. And there's a lot of organizations like that. They spend some of them millions and millions on an internal infrastructure team, and all that infrastructure team does is really lock down everything. So they don't really add much value. But that's the traditional way of running a large corporate's infrastructure. I think we're slowly seeing that change, but as you may or may not know, or in my opinion, corporations change a lot slower, and that's where you kind of see why agile firms and companies that are more able to take advantage of change are starting to disrupt and usurp some of the larger players. But yeah, sometimes you'll go into an organization and you've just got to accept that that's part of their culture and that's part of their way of doing things. And sometimes it's possible to work within those constraints, and sometimes it's not. It's really, as a consultant, sometimes you have to see whether you are actually able to do your job within the constraints of a large corporate. And sometimes, unfortunately, that answer is no, you can't. So it's whether you want to accept that hit your head against the wall, and accept your paycheck, or do you want to move on to an organization that is willing to embrace change and restructure so that they can actually achieve things. But that's sometimes a very fine balance. Okay, this might take a bit of time. I'm going to pause and then come back once it's done all of this wonderful post installation. Okay, so there you go. That was completed successfully. We don't have to look at the summary report. We can click finish. What we can do now is we can actually go into Chrome and make sure that Enterprise Portal is working. So it's Kudu ERP, that's the name of the server. We then do sites and we say Dynamics AX. And that's just the standard kind of URL that you'll use within Enterprise Portal. There's also employee services. So let me just use my login here. So it's going to take a bit of time, and like I mentioned a few times, a very common complaint with AX is how slow it is, and by extension, Enterprise Portal is even slower than the client. Also, this is the first time we've run it, so it might take a bit of time to come up. But yeah, sometimes you just need to open it, refresh, and then hopefully it'll cache itself. And then be a bit faster in future versions. So let's wait for that. Should be all good. And there you go. So this is Enterprise Portal. So as you can see, I can do my procurement, sales, compliance, all sorts of stuff on here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save that so that I have it. So I'm just going to call this Enterprise Portal. Enterprise Portal, and then now anytime I need to access it, it's just saved as a browser bookmark. Okay, and I think that's good. So we've got Enterprise Portal working. So in the next video, we'll go through SSRS and getting those reports deployed. Okay, cheers.